Police, what's your emergency?
Oh, police officers!
Elite police units, created to crack the toughest of cases.
My role was investigating serious and organised crime.
This was out of the ordinary, and this was a high-pressure situation.
Calm yourself down.
Their task, tackle the villains.
You got suspicion of murder, all right?
And bring them to justice.
A real whodidit.
With unique access to some of Britain's most talented detectives, we explore, for the first time, their investigations.
I've spent years putting together all of these tiny pieces of evidence.
Their methods.
The most bizarre investigation I've been involved in.
And the evidence that's put some of the UK's most dangerous criminals behind bars.
They look clever, and they're dangerous.
Human exploitation is a crime that UK police forces deal with on a regular basis.
Some of these men had lived in these conditions for 7 or 8 years. They had been brainwashed.
Modern-day slavery is now the second fastest crime for serious and organised crime gangs across the world. It's estimated that this crime generates over £130 billion a year for traffickers.
Modern slavery, it's fueled by the greed of human beings and the greed of individuals and the desire of ruthless individuals to exploit and to control other human beings.
Never did a day's work, but their life was all paid for by their slaves, as it were. So the National Crime Agency is there to investigate the real top of the tree criminals, the organised crime that are not just national but international, and we provide different skill sets that traditional law enforcement don't have access to. We support them on their inquiries, so we look at the longer drawn-out investigation. I've been working for the NCA since about 2016. Previously, I was a police officer. Having done my 30 years, I retired. I then became a civilian intelligence officer, and I specialise in human trafficking.
In 2022, cases of people being trafficked to become victims of modern slavery in Britain increased by 33%. With numbers of victims trapped in slavery in the UK estimated at more than 130,000. Tim Nelson is the CEO of anti-modern slavery charity Hope for Justice.
Modern-day slavery is really in every city across the UK, up and down high streets and round corners. It's really hidden in plain sight. Modern-day slavery itself can come in mainly 3 forms that we see in the UK. Labour exploitation, where people are forced to work in factory settings, agricultural settings, places where women predominantly are held in sexual exploitation, or where we see domestic servitude. That's where individuals are taken, held in homes and forced to do domestic chores, for many cases, for decades of their lives.
In early 2017, Maros Pereksa, a Slovakian police officer from the city of Košice, comes across some information that will launch the NCA's first modern slavery investigation.
We came across a person who claimed they'd been a victim of human trafficking. They said they'd been recruited by someone here in Slovakia and taken to England. Once there, they were forced to work long hours for no pay. They were basically treated as a slave.
The witness gives the names of 2 Slovak suspects who are allegedly trafficking and enslaving Slovakian nationals in Bristol.
As the crime was potentially still happening in England, we needed to contact the English authorities and ask them to check the story out for us.
After informing Interpol, the NCA are alerted in January 2017.
So this was, for me, the first time that we've been involved with the Slovakians. Lots of people make allegations, and it was a case of, we've got to look at that initial work. We've got to do the assessment as to whether it's true. If it is true, we've then got to start doing some risk assessments about how many victims there are there, whether those victims are under a huge amount of duress, whether they're under physical violence. So it's a balancing act as to whether we get enough evidence to be able to convict, but at the same time, we've got to rescue any potential victims.
NCA investigators look into the two suspects.
Really early on, we were aware that these two individuals had been subject to previous investigations by the police and that no charges had been brought. And it was quite apparent that that was because of no support from any victims. We know that victims of human trafficking are very, very reticent in coming forward and speaking to law enforcement.
The lack of victims willing to go to the police is a major obstacle in the fight against human trafficking and modern slavery.
For many of the individuals who are victims of modern-day slavery, because they've been through torture or abuse or manipulation, it can leave them almost paralyzed as to what they can do. We see through things like Stockholm Syndrome how individuals can build a kind of unrealistic view of the trafficker themselves. They can be attached to the trafficker. Over time, that they can build that kind of sense of they're not just my boss, they're someone who cares for me. But the reality is they're making money off their back as modern-day slavery victims.
The NCA start putting a highly specialised team together and launch Operation Langsat.
So we'll have a case officer, we'll have our own intelligence team, we'll have financial investigators allocated to us, we'll have digital media investigators for any devices that we're going to seize. We have our witness care team. And we also have various other assets, including surveillance officers that we're going to use, whether it be through human surveillance or through camera work.
The team get to work immediately.
We identified that the male subject had opened a car wash in Bristol. So our surveillance, it clearly showed both the male and the female subjects driving our victims from the house that they all lived in various vehicles, from there to the car wash on a daily basis. They were directing, they were instructing. Surveillance also showed them directing and controlling them at the car wash. So it was crucial to show, yes, these are the right people, and this is what they're doing.
Over the next few months, the NCA continue round-the-clock surveillance, building a complete picture of activities, both of the workers and their modern-day slave masters.
What they would do is that they would take the men and some women from the house early in the morning. They'd go to the car wash owned by the male subject. They would work 12 hours at that car wash. There'd be no pay. There'd be no health and safety around equipment. They were dealing with chemicals. From there, they would then be taken to various night shift work, packing, parcels, distribution centres, and then back home, and then back to work again.
Surveillance officers observed the workers often not returning to their accommodation before the early hours. After 5 months of intense surveillance, NCA officers are ready to arrest the two suspects. In July 2017, they strike.
So we arrested the male at his home address and the female at hers. When we opened the door to the male's address, there were 5 male victims of trafficking within that house.
With both suspects arrested, a 45-year-old Slovak man and a 46-year-old Polish woman, efforts turned to gaining the trust of their victims.
The worst case scenario for us is that none of the victims want to speak to us. And we're back in where law enforcement were on the previous occasions.
Britain's National Crime Agency is investigating an international people trafficking operation. An organised crime gang is taking vulnerable people from Slovakia and turning them into modern-day slaves. And they've just busted 2 of the slave masters.
We had a translator with us, meant he couldn't start shouting things in Slovak at them, you know, threatening and things. And then, whilst that was going on, we had interview teams that were speaking to the 2 subjects, but we also had full search teams and digital experts, crime scene investigators, and we searched all these properties.
It's the first time investigators can see the conditions the victims have lived in.
It was multiple mattresses in an attic, all living together. Loads of different bunk beds that they were putting cardboard under the mattress to try and make the beds a bit more comfortable because all the mattresses were busted. Some of these men had lived in these conditions for 7 or 8 years. They'd been with him since the beginning. They had been brainwashed into believing that we were not going to be there to look after them. So it was top priority that we had to show that they could trust us.
The 5 victims are looked after by the NCA Witness Care Team, and the 2 suspects are placed in custody.
Both made no comment. I interviewed the male subject and he didn't answer a single question.
Police gather thousands of documents and seize many items. Getting it processed in time proves a challenge.
We've got bags and bags of exhibits. We've got to go through the phones, we've got to go through the finances. We also had the problem of translation, so there was multiple documents that weren't in English. So we bailed them out.
Considered a flight risk and placed under house arrest, both suspects are tagged and have their passports confiscated. NCA officers can now begin to unravel the criminal operation, sifting through the mountains of material seized.
So we found, during our searches, identification cards, passports, national insurance cards. We knew that the subjects were being taken to the various job centres to get NI, national insurance cards, so that they could go and set up bank accounts.
As the scale of the crime becomes apparent, the Crown Prosecution Service becomes involved. Senior Specialist Prosecutor Ruona Agiyuwe is part of the team.
The CPS is independent, and we make decisions independently of the police and of the government, but we work together in partnership to ensure that strong cases are brought before the court.
Collating the evidence is important, but ensuring victims are on board is key to getting convictions.
That was important, and that helped enormously in gaining their confidence, which then helped to support the investigation. And the first 5 victims, in their accounts, revealed that there were many more victims. And as a result of that, the officers got in touch with the foreign investigators in Slovakia.
Daniel Roscoe is one of the Slovak police officers working with lead investigator Maros Pereksa.
Initially, we found and worked with at least 30 victims. The victims all came from poor backgrounds, which is very common in this type of crime. Most of them were Romani, who are people that are segregated from society. They live in camps and have little or no education, which makes them easy to manipulate.
The more people that you're moving around, the more organisation you've got to have. Undoubtedly, our male subject had help in Slovakia. So we had people over there that were doing his bidding for him and helping him put the people onto the planes, onto the coaches, etc.
The NCA send the witness care team to Slovakia to help local police with those victims who have returned home.
They spent months and months with these guys, sitting down with them, with interpreters, gaining their trust.
As they talk to the victims, it's evident the gang were targeting people at their most vulnerable.
And I went to where these guys came from. So they were predominantly from the Romani community that lived in a camp outside of the city. That you'll see from footage, it's just derelict. Windows missing from the buildings, rubbish piled up, no running water, no sanitary, no sewage, nothing like that. So what they were living in was horrendous if you think about modern day life.
While the suspects remain on bail in Bristol, the witness care team spend months securing statements from the 30 victims in the UK and Slovakia.
It was heartbreaking to read some of those accounts One victim described the address as a gateway to hell. Another victim talked about not being able to ever forget or put out of their minds the treatment that they had received.
The victims lived in poverty as the trafficking suspects took all their earnings.
We found evidence that the subjects lived a good lifestyle. The living room was out of bounds for our victims, not allowed to live in there. That was full of all the latest electrical equipment, nice furniture, everything that you wanted.
As the investigation deepens, officers uncover just how manipulative the two suspects were.
He used to take their mobile phone devices from them so they couldn't contact their family. We got evidence that he was pretending to be them on Facebook and sending messages back to their family to say that he was having a lovely time. And of course, by doing that, his friends or their friends would then see that this guy's having a great time in Bristol, and so they'd all come. And so unwittingly, they were then being the enticement for them, for more people to come.
By now, the investigation is drilling down into the granular details. It's a web of money transfers, deceit, and abuse of the system. Over £1 million flowing through various accounts.
The amount of inquiries that we had to do with the victims abroad and the financial stuff and grabbing it all in, all these different employment agencies, all these different places. So we had to go to the packing company, the distribution centre, all these firms and say, did X, Y and Z work any hours for you on these days?
Meanwhile, the hard work of the witness care team is paying dividends.
The victims had stated in their accounts that even though bank accounts were set up in their names, that they'd had no access to those bank accounts and that those bank accounts were solely controlled by the defendant. That turned out to be the case. The CCTV evidence at the banks showed the defendant making withdrawals from the victims' bank accounts and was used to support their lavish lifestyle, gambling habit, and other luxurious items that they purchased for themselves. So that was important evidence.
So when you start building all of it up, it's a really, really powerful case that these guys are making a large amount of money.
The team were able to track the slavery operation back a decade. And the suspects had made a huge pile of money in that time.
The benefit for these two was about 1.2 million. That was made up of £300,000 of money that had been legitimately paid by employment agencies into their accounts, and then another 900,000 that they should have paid in wages to the men and women who worked at the car wash. So 1.2 million, which they pretty much spent in casinos, on posh phones, all their own stuff. Never did a day's work, but their life was all paid for by their slaves, as it were.
By the end of their inquiries, Mark's team had identified over 40 victims and believed there were many more.
That was 42 we spoke to. There were a number of other passports and ID cards that we saw on phones that we never traced the individuals. Of those 42, 29 agreed to give statements.
In October 2019, after a 2.5-year investigation, both suspects are charged with offences relating to modern slavery. In February 2022, at Bristol Crown Court, the trial against the two suspects begins. Of the 29 victims who gave statements, 15 agreed to testify. It's what makes the difference.
The most impactful part of the case is the accounts given by the victims of their own treatment and observing the impact of the treatment on them is an important part of the case and the way that the evidence must have been presented to the jury.
The trial lasts 4 months.
The two defendants were found guilty of the trafficking charges that they faced by unanimous verdict of the jury, and the male defendant received 16 years and the female defendant received 9 years.
So at the end of the sentence, not only did he sentence those two, but he thanked the prosecutor, but he also gave a judge's commendation, which is quite rare, but not only to the UK staff, so our team, but also to the Slovak officers.
I was really pleased with the result. It was the culmination of years of hard, stressful work. I think the victims were pleased as well. They displayed huge amounts of courage and patience working with and cooperating with the police over such a long period of time.
I was really pleased because trafficking and modern slavery cases are difficult to prosecute, and our colleagues at the NCA had succeeded getting the case to court and getting a conviction.
Over half of the victims of modern-day slavery in the last reported year were men. This crime is hidden in plain sight. People don't see those individuals maybe in a car wash or those people in a nail bar that will be held against their will. They just walk past them. The sad reality is it's happening in towns and cities up and down this country and every country. And more needs to be done to try and eradicate the issue that's on our doorsteps.
So that was fulfilling to see justice done and for the perpetrators being brought to justice. Because modern slavery offences are serious offences that ruin victims' lives.
It's not just women in their 40s or 50s. Anyone can be a victim of romance fraud.
Stealing people's money has never gone out of fashion. 21st century criminals and organised crime gangs even train their recruits in how to go about it.
First, send a message and thank them for the money we don't give you. You could just send them love messages and all of that.
Aiming at the most vulnerable, those looking for love.
They are manipulative and they know exactly what to do to make the victims feel worthless and exploit as much money from them as they can.
So British police have an ongoing battle on their hands.
They look clever and they're dangerous.
Fraud in the UK is a £4 billion industry for criminals and a priority for police forces across the nation, including Surrey Police.
I am a detective in the Economic Crime Unit, and I've been there around about 7 years now.
In late 2020, an individual victim of a large-scale fraud comes to the attention of Surrey Police.
So I was doing an investigation when this victim was identified. And when we spoke to the victim, it became apparent very quickly that he was a victim of romance fraud, had been for 15 years. And so it was really a all hands on deck moment to identify the suspect and figure out what we were going to do next.
In 2022, romance fraud was responsible for more than £88 million being stolen from innocent victims. Perhaps surprisingly, the worst hit are men in their 20s. Becky Holmes is a romance fraud campaigner and activist.
It's quite common for people to imagine one person sitting on their laptop, emailing somebody. But generally, it's a very organised crime, and people will work literally in gangs to do it. You'll be speaking to 3 or 4 people while you're thinking you're speaking to one partner that you're in a relationship with.
Romance fraud is so common. But I really don't think we know the true level of just how common it is, because we are basing our figures and our facts on people that are coming forward and speaking about it. I truly don't think we know the gravity of this.
By tracing the cash transfers, DC Mason's team has a potential suspect in their sights. Digging deep into the details of the suspect's bank account, it doesn't take long to find the telltale signs of criminality.
It wasn't just that one victim that was paying money. There was a lot more other payments going through with bizarre narratives as well. under random people's names. Bit odd. And with no legitimate source of income. Where's it coming from? Victims of fraud is where it was coming from.
Concerned there could be multiple victims, Surrey police launch Operation Outback. DC Mason then sets out to learn as much as possible about the initial victim. It was a tragic tale.
This one particular victim that had been engaging with them for about 15 years. He knew it wasn't a real relationship, let's put it that way. But he valued that relationship he had with this person. This suspect had been with my victim for a lot of life trauma. He was his support network. So when the money requests started coming through, with him, initially it was smaller amounts of money, £20 here, £40 there. It gradually built up.
At 76, the victim had lost both his mother and aunt, and these deaths were being exploited.
So here we've got the suspect adopting the fake persona where my victim asked how his mother's doing. And he says, "Hello, my love. I have very sad news." And he put, "My mum is gone. I am not fine. I feel like committing suicide." My victim comes back and says, "You must not do that, my darling. You've got other family there." And he just comes back, "I want to kill myself." And then he put, "I'm sorry for asking this, but I need a favour. I've spent so much money. I'm so low with funds right now. I want you to please loan me the money, and when I get home next week, I will pay you back. I will be the happiest person if you could take the shame away from me. I don't know anyone else to ask or seek for help." My victim replies that it's not something he would normally do, and he's lost money in the past. I understand there are so many fake people on the internet trying to rip people out of their hard-earned money. In that sentence, he is basically describing himself. I will never. Can you just see the manipulation around that?
Romance fraud is a difficult crime to understand, but it's incredibly serious, and the financial losses are huge. Unfortunately, it can go on for many years.
The full extent of the fraudster's hold on the victim soon became evident.
Bear in mind, it was a 15-year period. He was of the age where he had retired, so he was basically sending his whole pension to the suspect. It was getting to the point where he'd sort of lost contact with all his friends because he couldn't afford to go out. That one victim sent probably around about 180,000.
With such large sums involved, Surrey police waste no time locating where the suspect lives. And it soon becomes clear he isn't acting alone.
There were two suspects that we identified, a male and his female partner. So they lived at the same address.
In January 2021, they raid the suspect's address in South London.
Let's sit downstairs for tea, ladies. What?
DC Mason stays in Surrey, waiting to hear from the arrest team going in.
Sit there, and it was almost like you could hear a pin drop in the office. We're just staring at the radio like something happened, just something, anything.
Police with warrant! Alright guys,
And when they said, yeah, we got 2 in custody. Brilliant. Great.
With the 2 suspects in custody, DC Mason's team sees a wealth of evidence from their address.
I think there were 3 or 4 mobile phones, a couple of computers, USB sticks, a lot of bank statements in the suspects' names were there.
Both suspects are taken to Surrey Police headquarters for questioning.
So you've been arrested for a range of offences: conspiracy to defraud, possession of fraudulent articles, possession of false ID documentation, money laundering. What can you tell me about the items that were found at your property?
No comment.
Do they belong to you?
No comment.
Or do they belong to...
No comment.
He gave a no-comment interview. She gave an account, basically denying all knowledge, saying that he does something. She's not sure how he gets his money, but, you know, she thinks it's legitimate, what he does.
Police are getting nowhere with their suspects, and time is running out.
So after that arrest, we obviously seized everything from their house, but we can't review all that in 24 hours. It's impossible to do. We were not in a position to charge, so we were left with no choice but to release him under investigation.
It's a bitter blow. DC Mason now has the unenviable task of informing the victim of the 15-year fraud.
I explained I had the phone that he was using to communicate with the suspect in my hands, and it wasn't the person he thought it was. But how do you process that? If you're in a relationship for 15 years and suddenly they went, this person isn't who you thought they were, and you're never going to see them again. I think there's a part of your brain that would turn around and reject that information because you don't want to believe it.
In romance fraud, long-term relationships like this are sadly relatively common.
And what I've learned, really, the most important thing is that there is no type of person. So I've spoken to some incredibly clever women, and there is no stupidity here. There's a lot of people who felt they were in a vulnerable position and they'd perhaps slightly taken their eye off the ball and found themselves in this awful, awful situation. So the emotional impact is horrific.
The 2 prime suspects at the heart of Operation Outback had preyed on countless other victims.
These images were sent to a victim of fraud from your mobile phone.
No comment.
Pretending you're at your mother's funeral. And can they send you some money to help?
No comment.
Nothing to say about that at all.
No comment.
DC Mason's team begin the long haul, sifting and searching for enough incriminating evidence to put an end to the financial damage and the betrayal of emotions.
We got the suspect's bank account and started reviewing the material around that. So what started off with 1 victim bank account led to 18 suspect bank accounts, 7 victim bank accounts, and 15,000 pages of exhibits.
From that first victim, officers traced a complex web of interactions, leading them to hundreds of victims targeted by the perpetrators.
It was amazing how much material one person could generate. Phones, computers, USB sticks. Him alone was like a walking crime spree unto himself.
City of London Police, the UK's lead force for fraud in all its forms, learn of the case.
City of London, they were very keen to find out what information I had on this case and what learning could be had from it.
The case piques the interest of City of London Fraud Intelligence Bureau analyst Ros Ellis.
We make every effort to enhance our understanding of romance fraud and to assist forces in getting convictions. I reached out and offered our support to help bolster the case.
Combining forces, DC Mason and Ros trawl through the mountains of material.
I think when I was interrogating the phone downloads, it became very clear the scale of this operation.
So we had one mobile phone that was clearly being used to speak to the victims. When we reviewed that, there was 180 victims identified on this one phone alone.
The average loss for victims of romance fraud is £8,000. Scaling that up, this is an organised scam worth close to 1.5 million.
Sadly, I think this is fairly common, where you have one victim. It's the tip of the iceberg, and there are often multiple tens, hundreds of other victims affected.
As the pair delve deeper into the devices, they make a key discovery.
And what actually came apparent whilst we were reviewing the phone is that he was obviously targeting gay men.
So it's not just women in their 40s or 50s. Anyone can be a victim of romance fraud. There's a fairly even split between male and female victims. They could be in their 20s all the way up to in their 80s. And gay men are disproportionately targeted.
In this particular case that we've been talking about, with gay men, it could well be that some of the men haven't come out to their friends and families yet. And that means that, unfortunately, there are two reasons not to go to the police. The first one is that they don't want to appear foolish for having been the victim of a romance fraud. And the second reason is that they don't want to actually admit to anybody that they're gay.
With the investigation ongoing, DC Mason receives some worrying information. Whilst on bail, the pair are still targeting their victims.
I got a call from my victim who said, guess what? The suspect's just messaged me. He said he's been robbed abroad. And I've not only have I got to send him some more money, but he's given me a new telephone number.
The suspects need to be stopped, and fast.
So straight away, I got onto those phones and started looking through them. Oh, God.
City of London fraud analyst Ros Ellis is on the trail of some romance fraudsters who've been duping victims for over 15 years.
When you read through the victim communications, some of it makes for very hard reading. When the suspects are repeatedly love-bombing, gaslighting, using emotional blackmail and coercive control to manipulate and defraud victims.
Her colleague, Surrey Police Detective Constable Becky Mason, has been interviewing the suspects.
Got a check here. £4,000. You look confused, but £100,000 has gone for account.
While DC Mason continues to work through the communications between the suspect and the victim, Ros follows the money.
We could evidence just shy of £500,000 coming from romance fraud victims, and a large amount of that money was leaving the country, going to West Africa.
The fact money is being funneled to West Africa doesn't come as a surprise.
Romance fraudsters tend to be part of a wider organised criminal group. Often based in West Africa, sometimes with a UK element. They're career criminals.
Surrey Police confirm the fake dating profiles have been created to be used by anyone operating within the OCG. They have produced a manual to defraud.
And then we move on to here, which is basically a script of what they put on their dating profile. All about their ex-partner, who their ex-partner was, where they grew up, if they had pets, what the name is. So basically, if anyone takes over the identity or wants to continue, they know the story. They know his history. Shocking. Continues. Pages and pages of a script. I came across a voice note to another person, and he explained how to commit the fraud, the story to spin.
Yeah, okay. You could just tell them, say, you could just send them love messages and all of that for 1 or 2 days, then So you just hear say your mama don't die, sure. So from there, you would know how strong he is.
And what was interesting about this voice note was that the story he was telling this other person was identical to the story that was spun to my victims.
Sometimes you ask money for burial, make you help out for burial. Then, from there, we'll come put out for inheritance, tell them the amount, everything.
We had USB sticks that were titled Luke. Well, Luke was one of our fake personas. Another one called Alan. All different people. They'd named them on a USB stick so they could keep up with their lies. There was death certificates in there, letters showing inheritance they were due to get. Anything that could support the lie they were spinning. This had been thought through. From an investigation point of view, brilliant. Shows they had knowledge.
Finally, the team has enough evidence to charge the suspects.
At one point, I actually read out in the interview some of the chat.
I'm sorry for asking this, my love. I don't want to ask you, but please loan me the money. And when I get home, I will pay you back. You're just not letting up. I've been going through a lot these last few days and feel like committing suicide.
He had messaged one of my victims to say that he was going to kill himself if my victim didn't send money.
I don't like going through this much stress. Please, you never lose me or your money.
And that basically that death would be on his hands. Who does that?
A year later, in December 22, the case goes to trial at Guildford Crown Court.
So having all of that material, all of that evidence, means that we can go to trial in a really good position.
The suspects continue to profess their innocence, but they're immediately confronted with a mammoth amount of evidence against them.
Every single argument that they put forward, we were able to prove otherwise, which made it a strong case. The strongest case I've ever taken to court.
Defeated on the second day, both suspects changed their plea to guilty.
I mean, that's quite rare, that you plead during a trial. I think that says it all about the evidence.
On December 23rd, the suspects are both sentenced. The man gets 8 years for conspiracy to defraud, concealing criminal property, and possession of an identity document for improper means. His partner receives 3 years and 9 months for money laundering.
Romance fraud is cruel and it's callous, and it can be devastating financially, emotionally, and psychologically. People are losing significant amounts of money, but they're also losing something that to them was very real, a relationship and a future.
I was personally pleased to see that they got a hefty sentence as well. I think it's indicative of the fact that we've recognised what a big crime this is, what a destructive crime this is.
It was a fantastic result. Not only was it great to tell my victims that we have finally got justice for you, but it was a warning to other suspects that not only will you be arrested, but you are going to go to prison and you're going to go for a long time.